My husband actually is a firefighter, a driver operator in our hometown, and so being here is pretty tough. Mr. Parr, appreciate our conversation. I look forward to our field hearings in Florida later in the year. But since we're for crunch for time, I wanted to get right to an issue, Ms. Kavanaugh, that I think is really a lot of our departments, particularly in the wake of COVID, are struggling with, and that's the EMS component that our fire departments are responding to, and how that relates to the overall response of our front lines. So we know that there's an increased need for training, resources, and technologies in that deployment. And in a terrorist situation, that response is not just the first response, it's then the care that immediately occurs after. So can you talk briefly about some of the holes that you're seeing with the fire service specifically and the EMS response capabilities, and what we could be doing on the federal side to provide additional resources?
Sure, thank you. I think that really highlights how important this funding is and all the ways that it's used that aren't always anticipated, right? We think of terrorism first and foremost, but there are so many different ways in which our terrorism preparedness prepares us for things like COVID-19. So to give you a few examples, much of the training and the equipment that we had for years in order to prepare for a bioterrorism event was actually utilized under COVID-19. So our members' ability to know how to decontaminate, to have the equipment to do so, to have the proper PPE, and to know how that kind of event might unfold, including, we had numerous plans preparing for a pandemic, and that all comes out of federal funding. So it really highlights how, it's absolutely necessary to do a lot of this training, even when the threat picture is changing, because the training we do is really preparing us for something else that we may not even be able to imagine at the time, but almost always comes in when we need it and is essential, that funding was there, that training was there, that equipment was there. And same thing goes for being a regional asset. So, when COVID hit, obviously New York was first in the country to be hit really hard, and we had to call in FEMA resources. EMS from other states came to help us because we were hit so hard so quickly, and we, as I mentioned, are often deployed to help others. So those are some areas where there's really a lot of overlap between things that you might typically think of as terrorism and things that you might not typically think of, but that our training and funding has actually been absolutely essential in that regard. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to prepare for all kinds of emergencies, as I think Mr. Miller alluded to. You really can't sort of always imagine what the threat is going to be, but through the proper amount of training, especially with one another, you can be prepared for whatever presents itself, especially in a city like ours, and in our nation, which, as we're seeing, there seems to be one emergency after another, week after week.
Ms. Kamek, may I add something to that?
Absolutely.
From the fire department perspective, in partnership with the NYPD, we really had to rewrite the book. In the active shooter category, a friend of both Ms. Kavanaugh and Chief Downey, Joe Pfeiffer, began a program, and it unfolded in this very building, where in the active shooter realm, whether it's terrorist, workplace violence, it doesn't matter when the shooting's going on, but there's two goals there. One is to stop the killing. So that's what we do. Emergency service, backed up by strategic response, backed up by CRC. We will create rings around that while they go hunt and neutralize who's ever shooting. But the bigger challenge has always been not just stop the killing, but stop the dying. We can go all the way back to Columbine about people bleeding out while they waited to secure the location to bring in medical response. We have trained again and again and again with the rescue task force of the fire department, so that they have ballistic protection and helmets, that we are able to create a hot zone where the shooter may be, but then that warm zone where victims may be, where we can start to get fire department, both firefighters and emergency medical personnel in there under force protection to start getting people who are viable and can be saved out. And we have done that again and again, watching the time. How long does it take to get to a warm zone? How long does it take to get suited up and get in? How long does it take to get out? So that in the likely but unfortunate and God forbid incident that we have that we have drilled again and again and again together in the most realistic circumstances. That's a new challenge for EMS and firefighters, but one that they have risen to proudly and deftly. The last feature of that is, and we saw this in the Mumbai attacks, but we've seen it since, is what do you do when you have a terrorist attack or an active shooter and fire at the same time? So we have worked together on that as well, which is an extraordinary challenge and not unlikely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Safe guys.